30 questions, 30 NBA teams. That's right, we have one question for each NBA team leading into the 2024-2025 NBA season. I'm extremely excited for this video. A lot of time and work went into it. And if you're looking for your favorite team, I have chapters down in the description, so it will have the exact time that I jump to your team. Obviously talking about all 30 teams in this video, so I hope you guys do enjoy. I hope you stay around for the entire video so that way you feel up to date on the entire NBA, as I'm going to talk about what I think is the biggest question for each of these 30 teams and the biggest thing I'm going to be watching for this upcoming season. Without further ado, let's jump into it here with an example of what my analysis will not look like in this video. And an example of that is, does Anthony Edwards take the next step? That is not analysis. That is kind of a brain dead question, and one that doesn't really have a lot of substance, doesn't really break down anything that, first of all, Anthony Edwards currently does, anything that Minnesota needs him to get better at. There's really no meat or potatoes in that kind of quote unquote analysis. So first of all, when you're watching NBA content, make sure you're looking for good analysis like you'll hopefully see in this video today. But then also, when you're talking about the NBA, make sure you are being descriptive and really analyzing, breaking down, and pointing to certain things you need to see players either get better at or teams to get better at. Some of the questions in today's video will be team-centric, some of them will be player-centric. Make sure you guys stay tuned for that. Let's get into it now with the first team, the Atlanta Hawks. What do I want to see from Atlanta this year, and what do I think is the biggest question for the Hawks this upcoming season? My big question, does a young guard emerge as a core piece around Trae Young? If so, which one? Part of the reason why this is my big question for Atlanta, we just saw the DeJounte Murray experiment fail. The Hawks ended up trading DeJounte Murray for a fraction of the price they paid to get him, sent him out to New Orleans, and now instead they have a lot of question marks in the backcourt. Now they do have Bogdan Bogdanovic, but with his current age, I think looking for the future here for Atlanta, looking to find who could be a running mate in the backcourt is a really big question. Three of the ones I have featured on the graphic here are Dyson Daniels, Kobe Buffkin, and Vit Krejci. This is a really interesting conversation. Do any of these three really emerge as a core piece for Atlanta moving forward? And if I had to bet, which one? They got Dyson Daniels in the trade of DeJounte Murray. I'm not the biggest Dyson Daniels fan. I think of him more as a wing than a point guard or as a guard in general. And this is something that, going back to his draft class, when I was a little bit lower on him than most other draft analysts, that was my big concern, is I didn't really believe the handle enough and I didn't believe the shooting enough, and I'm not sure if he's going to be able to elevate in those areas, even though there are a lot of pros of playing him next to a Trae Young style player. With Dyson Daniels' good size, his length, his athleticism, and his defensive feel, those things all sound like big positives next to Trae Young. But with the current state of the NBA, the value of shooting, the value of perimeter skill, I'm just not sure if someone like Dyson Daniels is going to really stand out. Someone who I think has a better chance of lasting long-term there in Atlanta is Kobe Buffkin, who in his time at Michigan really stood out with his ability to play make off the dribble, score with the ball in his hands. Then obviously the defensive tape was still really, really good as well for Kobe Buffkin. So I think out of the three players pictured on the screen, I think Kobe Buffkin does have the best chance. And if one does emerge, I would pick it to be him currently. Vit Krejci had the pass of the preseason, though. I've liked Vit Krejci for a while. His overall feel, I think there's a lot there. The big question for him is, can he make enough shots, and is he strong enough to really warrant playing a lot of minutes? Right now, the answer to that is no. Do I have a lot of optimism or faith that he will be a core piece there in Atlanta? Probably not. I would love to see it. I really like Vit Krejci's game. I think there's something there for sure. I'm just not sure if we're going to see it really unravel completely there for the Hawks or not. But if I had to bet, Kobe Buffkin will be my pick. Again, monitor this as we go throughout the video. I want you guys to share your input on these teams. What do you think is going to happen? And also, what big questions do you have for these 30 teams as well? Now we move on to the reigning champion Boston Celtics. And my big question for the Celtics really has to do with the rim volume. What is Boston's shot volume at the rim? We know this team is going to lead the entire NBA in three-point attempts. this upcoming year. They led the NBA in threes last year. The very first preseason game against Denver, they shot 35 threes in the first half, and that was without Al Horford and without Kristaps Porzingis. We know Boston's going to get their three-point attempts up. We know how much of a mathematical advantage that is for them when it comes to beating other teams. If you shoot more threes and make more threes, you're going to have a significant advantage over the other teams in the NBA just with how valuable the three-point shot is and how efficient players have become at shooting that shot, especially off the catch. But really for Boston, I think the heart of their offense and when they're at their best, it flows from dribble drive penetration and shot volume at the rim. And I think the two biggest leaders in that regard are obviously their two best players, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Now, Derek White does a good job, sometimes sitting in the dunker spot, operating as a driver as well. And then Drew Holiday sometimes sits in the dunker. Those guys contribute to their shot volume at the rim for sure. But I think for Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, especially when the games get tight and we get to crunch time, those two guys have to be rim oriented, and that's something we've seen Jason Tatum shy away from at times. I think during the playoffs he was good about being a driving kick player. I know a lot of people thought Jason Tatum had a bad NBA Finals. I thought he had a pretty good NBA Finals actually. The shots weren't falling for him as a scorer, but everything else he did was amazing in that final series. And then I also have to take my victory lap here. Remember a year ago people were trolling Jaylen Brown when he got that huge extension with the Boston Celtics, saying, oh, they should have broken up the Jays and Jaylen Brown's not worth this, that, or the other thing. He's now a Finals MVP. The Celtics win a championship. So here's my little mini victory lap. The Celtics, I think, are the favorites to win the NBA Finals again this year. If I had to pick a team right now, I would pick Boston. I don't have a ton of questions around this team. They brought back most of their core. I feel really good about how they are going to go into the season. I think they're hungry, motivated, and they want to repeat really, really badly, which is a great thing for them. I think they're the favorite to win the NBA Finals again. But I think at the heart of their team identity, the more shots at the rim they can generate, the better. That's what I'm watching for early in the season this upcoming year. Now the Brooklyn Nets, and this is a little bit of a different team than the Boston Celtics. Maybe not the true contenders that the Boston Celtics are, but my question for the Brooklyn Nets is centered around their brand new head coach. What does Jordi Fernandez's offense specifically ask Nick Claxton to do? We know Cam Thomas can score the basketball, possibly score 25 to 30 points a game this year. We'll see how much the ball is in his hands or not. But the big reason for me asking this about Jordi Fernandez, he comes from Sacramento. He was on Mike Brown's staff with the Kings. Mike Brown, if you guys don't know this, Mike Brown runs probably more zoom action than anyone in the NBA, utilizes Domantas Sabonis in that fashion, and really opens up a lot of creative, quick offense for the Kings with a lot of space. And a lot of good opportunities for players to play off the catch, play off the handoff specifically. And I'm really curious if Brooklyn leans into that very much or not. And I think if they do, it can make Nick Claxton one of the more valuable big men in the entire NBA. Nick Claxton's one of the best defensive bigs right now. He hasn't really had the personnel around him to really contend for Defensive Player of the Year, like I think he's maybe capable of if he had the right personnel around him. But what I do know is Jordi Fernandez, who I think is going to be a successful coach in this NBA. The big question here is, does he emulate what he saw from Mike Brown, or does he ask Nick Claxton to play more out of the middle of the floor, below the free throw line, below the nail? Is he asking him to sit in the dunker spot? Is he asking him to be a low post option at times? Where does he want him in transition? Does he have the ball in transition at all? That's really the big question for me here. It's going to be a lost season for the Brooklyn Nets. They're more focused on capturing the flag than they are on winning an NBA title right now, but there are still a lot of principles and important aspects that a first-year head coach can instill in his team for the future. And I think the biggest one here centers around Nick Claxton. How much does he have the ball? Is he triggering dribble handoffs? What exactly is he doing in the half court offensively? That'll be the big question for me to watch going into this year. The Charlotte Hornets, another team, I think very, very interesting. They have a brand new first-time head coach in Charles Lee. And the question for them, again, centers around their head coach. Health aside, the Hornets, who have not dealt with very good health over the last couple of years, assuming they're healthy, the big question for me is, can Charles Lee instill a real defensive culture in Charlotte? It's been a few years since we've seen the Hornets be really competitive, going back to their final season with James Borrego as the head coach. After a couple of years of not getting their primary coaching candidate that they wanted, having some real dysfunction, Steve Clifford not being a great head coach like we all know, they need someone who can really instill a defensive culture, especially now that they have some legitimate talent. LaMelo Ball, he's a legit all-star caliber player when he's healthy. Brandon Miller, I think, has the chops to maybe grow into an all-NBA forward at some point. That was my pre-draft analysis on him. Mark Williams, if he's healthy, I think he is a really, really good big man and a much better defensive big man than someone like Nick Richards, who I think struggles a little bit with the defensive feel side of things, knowing when and how to bring help defense. If Mark Williams is healthy and if LaMelo Ball is healthy, the Hornets have the offensive talent to compete with a lot of Eastern Conference teams. The question is, can they really hone in a defense? And I think LaMelo Ball not only has to be a part of that, he has to be a leader in that. Early in his career, I think LaMelo Ball, what I've called him a few times, has been a revolving door. And not that he's changing a lot or anything like that, like how we typically use revolving door. What I mean is he's literally just turning open to let guys by him. He is getting blown by at an alarming rate, honestly. Every time I feel like I'm watching the Hornets when LaMelo Ball is playing, he is not getting a single perimeter stop. I just need LaMelo Ball to become a quality defender. League average is what I really need LaMelo Ball to be, so he has to buy in on the defensive side of the floor. And I think that's going to be Charles Lee's biggest problem here in Charlotte is, can he build a good team defense with such a young unit? That's a tough thing to do. It's what makes Jamal Mosley so special in Orlando. If Charles Lee's able to do that, the Hornets have the talent. They're young enough. They're athletic enough. There's a lot of exciting things that the Hornets are going to be capable of doing, but it needs to start on the defensive end of the floor for sure. More ball pressure, better contain on the perimeter, better screen navigation, and better, more reliable rim protection. If they get those things, I think the Hornets could be a really sneaky surprise team this season. The Chicago Bulls, a team that I don't think is going to be super sneaky and not much of a big surprise team, although I am very excited about the direction of this team compared to where they were a year ago. After losing DeMar DeRozan and picking up Josh Giddey, I think the Bulls have a new little bit of life to their offense potentially, and I want to see how effective a team offense can be built around Josh Giddey. I don't think this is the perfect team around Josh Giddey, but I think it's an okay starting point, and I think this is going to give Arturas Karnisovas and the Bulls front office a lot of answers on what to do next, where to go from here. After trading Alex Caruso and losing DeMar DeRozan in a sign-and-trade with the Kings, I now think Chicago, first of all, they have a lot of eggs in one basket here on Josh Giddey. It's a little bit of a risk for sure, but this is a far better team context for Josh Giddey than the Oklahoma City Thunder were. Not that the Bulls are better than the Thunder, but for the role that Josh Giddey now finds himself in, it's going to be more beneficial for his individual game. And that stands true from what I watched back when he was at Adelaide, playing in the NBL. He is a player who is going to thrive with the ball in his hands, playing in the pick and roll a lot, and operating out of the middle of the floor. And for OKC, that just wasn't tenable for them. They had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, they had Chet Holmgren, they had Jalen Williams. Josh Giddey became an afterthought. And now for Chicago, he's not an afterthought anymore. In fact, he's going to be a primary ball handler for them with some shooting around him. Zach LaVine, as bad as his contract is and as low as his trade value is right now, people forget how good of a shooter Zach LaVine is. Lonzo Ball has really turned himself into a very, very good NBA three-point shooter. Now, obviously, we need to see if he stays healthy and can actually get on the basketball court to begin with. But if Lonzo Ball is healthy this year, if LaVine's healthy this year, and with guys like Kobe White and newly added Jalen Smith around Josh Giddey, there's enough shooting, there's enough of an infrastructure here to see how efficient and how effective Josh Giddey can be with the ball in his hands. I think Josh Giddey's going to be in the running for most improved player this year. In fact, he's my prediction for that award. And I think this team context around him is going to really revitalize his career in a way, and especially the narrative around his career. Obviously, this past season at OKC was littered with some off-the-court issues, and on-court play was not good either. So Josh Giddey has a lot of work to do to rebuild his status around the NBA, but I think this team, specifically the Chicago Bulls, who are, again, not playing for contention at all, they're in a spot here where Josh Giddey's trade value and the narrative around his career might change drastically this year. And that's one of the most exciting things for me, is seeing how Giddey performs with this kind of unit, this kind of team around him. I still don't think Nikola Vucevic is going to be very good or effective this year for the Bulls, but I think with the overall team context, the Bulls have just enough shooting. They have some young guys too, like Matas Buzelis, who might fit into this pretty well as a cutter and a guy who can play off the catch decently well. I'm excited about the Bulls from an entertainment standpoint this year, and just seeing how they play and watching a team like this built around Josh Giddey. It'll be a fascinating watch for sure. The Cleveland Cavaliers, and talk about big questions. The Cavaliers, I think, have a lot of them, but the most important question for me has to deal with Evan Mobley. And the question is, what is Evan Mobley's three-point volume as a young big man? Thinking back to his time at USC before coming into the league and then coming into Cleveland alongside Jarrett Allen, how important is it for him to develop a three-point shot from where he was as a high school prospect to where he is now as a near NBA veteran, right? He's getting to that point in time where we're not going to call him a young guy anymore. He's getting close to being a vet in the NBA. And for Evan Mobley, I think the three-point shot needs to be the primary concern, especially with Jarrett Allen inking himself to the organization for a while. The Cavs are in on Jarrett Allen, which means Evan Mobley needs to become a more prominent floor spacer. That's something he's worked on. Last year, shot a career number of three-point attempts per game, and making a decent number of them as well. So I think for Mobley, the upside is still there. That was something at USC I had mentioned multiple times, evaluating him as a prospect. There is shooting touch. There is some real potential for him to become a stretch big of some sort. Now, it also has to deal with his perimeter skills. Can he dribble? Can he pass off the perimeter? And how effectively can he do that against some of the fours in the Eastern Conference? That's, again, a very tough challenge. But I do think Evan Mobley, his three-point volume is one of the most important things to monitor for the Cavs this year, because I think for their half-court offense, they've done a good job supplanting other shooters around Donovan Mitchell, around Jarrett Allen, around Evan Mobley, around Darius Garland. They went on and got George Niang, they went on and got Max Strus, but Mobley's kind of the last piece of this. If he can shoot more threes and shoot more of them at an effective rate, it will open up the Cavs offense a bit more. And I think Kenny Atkinson's such an interesting piece of this. Kenny Atkinson actually was coaching for Team France as an assistant coach for the French national team during the Olympics. And if you didn't watch that, one thing that happened that was really, really important for the French national team, they shied away from their double big lineups. You would think Gobert and Victor Wembanyama together would be such a devastating combination defensively. The French national team just did not like that combination. They played Gobert when Wembanyama was off the floor, and they played Wembanyama when Gobert was off the floor. And Kenny Atkinson was a part of that decision. So if Evan Mobley's three-point volume isn't there, will Kenny Atkinson look to completely split the Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen minutes? And if so, that feels like a long-term disastrous outcome for the Cavaliers, because it's an admission almost that two of your four best players can't play together. But at the same time, it could strengthen a majority of their lineups. Obviously, there's going to be a lot that we have to see unfold yet, and I think Evan Mobley's three-point shooting is at the heart of concerns there for Cleveland over the next couple of years, and specifically this upcoming season. My Dallas Mavericks. This is fun. There's so many different ones I could point to. I could talk about Klay Thompson. I could talk about PJ Washington. I could talk about Derek Lively's evolution as a player. There's a lot of questions I have about this team. What roles will everyone fill? How will they all fit together? What do I think about Dallas? There's a lot to talk about, but the most important one is what led them to the NBA Finals last year, and that was their team defense. And will teams adjust to how they attack Dallas this year, especially in the half court? Dallas started to chokehold teams in the postseason and toward the end of the regular season after the trade deadline because of the amount of length, size, rim protection that they had. Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford are the two headliners. PJ Washington's size and athleticism obviously contributed to that as well. But I think the biggest thing with Dallas is they really shrunk the floor around these guys, funneled players into these big men, whether it be Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford, and dared teams to beat them at the rim by aggressively running them off the three-point line and really shrinking the floor around them, allowing a lot of weak side dribble drive kick penetration. And I think in the finals we saw how Boston, a team built to hit and shoot a lot of three-pointers like we've already talked about in this video, Boston picked apart Dallas's defense as a result. Does Dallas look to continue doing the same thing? I would expect so. So if that's the case, how does a team like Minnesota, how does a team like Denver, how do some of the other upper echelon Western Conference teams like Oklahoma City, for example, go about attacking Dallas? For me, the best case would be put your two best shooters on the weak side of the floor, look to attack off the dribble from the strong side, and look to kick over the top of the defense to the weak side. Will Dallas be reluctant to help off your shooters? Will that transform how Dallas changes their defense throughout the course of the regular season? And will it be as effective for the entire 82-game season as it was in a short burst after the trade deadline last year? Those are the big questions I have for Dallas. I think that their team is extremely talented. I like their overall roster construct right now. But I think right now, if I had one thing to be really concerned about, it's the likely fact that teams have figured out what Dallas was trying to do defensively, and if they can really adjust to it in an effective manner this upcoming season. The Denver Nuggets, I just talked about them as one of the best teams in the Western Conference. One of my big questions is how many threes did the Denver Nuggets take, and does Russell Westbrook increase this number? Now, some of you might be saying, wait a minute, why would Russell Westbrook increase this number, especially since they lost Kentavious Caldwell-Pope? Well, first of all, the Nuggets last year were last in the entire NBA, shooting just a little bit over 30 three-point attempts per game. For comparison's sake, Boston, who ranked number 1, shot over 42 three-point attempts per game. So they were shooting about 11 less threes per game than a team like Boston. And around Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, it does make a little bit of sense. Your two best players don't shoot a ton of threes. Jamal Murray loves his mid-range pull-up. Jokic likes those post fades. He likes to get to the rim. He likes relying on his floater, playing with more of his touch inside the arc rather than outside of it. And I think that's been a kind of a fallacy or a foresight here from Calvin Booth, their GM, when it comes to roster building. He hasn't valued a ton of three-point shooting. They do have Michael Porter Jr., and this is where I think Russell Westbrook is going to really potentially pay dividends for them. And this is, again, potentially is such an important word here, because at times I've seen the hype for Russell Westbrook and at times have been really disappointed because he just doesn't play the way I think he's capable of playing in the right context. So it depends on what kind of version you're getting of Russ and what Michael Malone is asking Russell Westbrook to do. If you're asking Russell Westbrook to play alongside Nikola Jokic, heavy minutes, I just don't know if I love that. If you're asking Russell Westbrook to lead your second unit when Nikola Jokic is off the court, that's something I can get behind, because I think Russell Westbrook's ability to still drive the basketball, beat his man off the bounce on the perimeter, get into the teeth of the defense, and then spray it out to shooters is going to be valuable. And the bench unit here for Denver, I think, has objectively improved from last season. Yes, you did lose Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. That will stretch your starting lineup a little bit. Definitely does test them at the top of their team. But they added Dario Saric. They got Vlatko Cancar back from injury as well. I think those two guys with Russell Westbrook are good floor spacing options, good catch and shoot threats off of Russell Westbrook driving kicks. So for me, those are the big questions for the Denver Nuggets. How many threes can they shoot? They need to shoot more than they did last year for sure. Again, it's a math equation. If you want to maximize Nikola Jokic and his passing and his greatness as a scorer and facilitator, you need to shoot a lot of threes around him. How about Aaron Gordon? What's his three-point volume look like? Those are the big questions here for the Nuggets. I think that they hopefully will see a little bit of an uptick from three. My biggest concern, though, is that they don't shoot enough threes to overcome a team like Dallas, who ranked second in the NBA last year in three-point attempts, and added Klay Thompson to a team around both Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. The Detroit Pistons, a team that really struggled a year ago under Monty Williams. I already have questions about their new head coach, JB Bickerstaff. And the question is, can he make two point guards work in unison? And in Cleveland, the answer to that was no. Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, the coexistence of those two guys at times was not pretty. Darius Garland especially has been the one who has taken a little bit more of a backseat behind Donovan Mitchell. Mitchell is definitely the better player, so that is understandable. But you don't want one player to feel like they have to take a back seat, and you don't want a your turn, my turn kind of dilemma that we've seen from a lot of guard combinations in recent NBA history. And JB Bickerstaff did not do a great job overseeing that there in Cleveland. Now, they did win a playoff series. I do think JB Bickerstaff is an upgrade at coach over Monty Williams. No question about that. However, the big question for me, and if you're going to maximize the Detroit Pistons both now and long term, you need to find a way to make Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey work harmonically. They need to be a unison. They need to be a duo that is beneficial to each other's games. Jaden Ivey, in games that Cade Cunningham was out, was stellar. When Cade Cunningham played, Jaden Ivey was a mediocre starting player in the NBA. At best, honestly. And this is coming from a huge Jaden Ivey fan. I think Jaden Ivey still has star potential. I think he needs the right coach and the right team context around him to help him get there. And I still think that in Detroit, that could be the place. But JB Bickerstaff has to do a better job figuring out ways to incorporate these two guys together. For me, I think if you use Jaden Ivey as a screener on Cade Cunningham, that could work extremely well. Get Jaden Ivey the ball on a short roll. Let him playmake with Jalen Duren sitting in the dunker spot. There's a lot of creative ways I think you could incorporate these two together, having them both play with the ball more frequently without it being a your turn, my turn, hey, you watch me while I take this pick and roll in the middle of the court kind of scenario like we saw last year. And I think this is the big question for the Pistons. If they get these two guys playing at their highest level together, I think Cade Cunningham can be a true all-NBA-ish guard, all-star-ish guard in the NBA. And I think Jaden Ivey's capable of being an all-star as well. I think Jaden Ivey, with his speed, his athleticism, the ability to knock down deep-range threes at times, he's definitely a streaky shooter, but when he's on, he's almost unguardable. There's nights where Jaden Ivey can take over a game. And that's rare. You don't say that about every single player in the league. You don't say that about every young player in the league. And I think Jaden Ivey has shown a lot of potential, but he's also had to deal with some really rough coaching contexts that he's tried to overcome, right? The situation in Detroit has not been pretty. So I'm holding my judgment on a lot of their young players until they actually have a head coach in place that can help them. I think JB Bickerstaff hopefully is going to be that guy. But the big question here is, can he make these two guys work? Because if not, I think Detroit's future is a little less bright than it should be, given their young talent. Moving on to the Golden State Warriors, a team that doesn't have immense young talent, but they have some interesting ones. My question right now, though, are they big enough to match up in the Western Conference with their starting lineup that'll likely feature Draymond Green at center? You're going to see Jonathan Kuminga, Andrew Wiggins as your forwards, with likely either Steph Curry and then one of DeAnthony Melton or Brandon Podziemski. That's a really small starting five. Buddy Hield off the bench as well. Kyle Anderson maybe playing either the power forward or center spot even at times. This team is just very little. And when you think about going up against Nikola Jokic, you think about facing Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert in Minnesota, you think about Alperen Şengün in Houston. There's just a lot of size in the Western Conference, and I think for Golden State, a team that's relatively small and doesn't have a ton of three-point shooting. It has some, obviously, with Buddy Hield and Steph Curry. Those are two of the highest volume three-point shooters in the league. Brandon Podziemski is a very good three-point shooter, but outside of that, you don't have a lot of guys who are known for their three-point shot. Like Andrew Wiggins shoots some. He's not an elite three-point shooter. That's true for most of their roster outside of their top three shooters. So I think that's going to be one of the big questions for the Warriors, too, is do they shoot enough to overcome some of their size deficits? And how does Steve Kerr build a great team defense here with the lack of size? How much does Kevon Looney play? And how effective is Kevon Looney when he's on the floor? I'm just a little pessimistic here about the Warriors. I do, for the most part, like their overall roster. I like a lot of the players on their team. I think they have a lot of skill, a lot of talent. And you guys know I'm a big skill guy when it comes to the NBA. I think the more skill you have, the better. But at some point, there needs to be a line in the sand about how athletic, how big do you have to be? And this Warriors team just doesn't feature a ton of raw athleticism, doesn't feature a ton of raw size. And I think with that in mind, that's the big question here is, can they really effectively match up with some of the bigger teams in the Western Conference on a night in, night out basis? The Houston Rockets now, another team with a lot of questions. But my biggest one going into the year, it's not if Jalen Green has his breakout finally. Again, I don't really think that's analysis. My question is, how does Ime Udoka weaponize Amen Thompson? I think there's a lot of different options for this. I think, first of all, we saw it a little bit with Alperen Şengün last year. Not only Şengün working out the middle of the floor, Amen Thompson being this unique athlete who can work the baseline as a cutter, do a lot of dynamic things in that way. That's one way that Ime Udoka will definitely look to weaponize Amen Thompson. What I really want to see is Amen Thompson working with some of the newest acquisitions in Houston. I want to see him working with Steven Adams in ball screens at the top of the key. I want to see Steven Adams setting a highway screen to get Amen Thompson going downhill and utilizing that length, size, athleticism, and finishing ability that made him such a freakish prospect coming out of Overtime Elite a couple of years ago. I just think Ime Udoka needs to be creative in the ways that he goes about getting Amen Thompson the ball, the frequency with which Amen Thompson has the ball. I still think Amen Thompson's a point guard, and I think utilizing most recent first-round pick there in Houston, Reed Shepherd, as a co-weapon with Amen Thompson is one of the best ways to really beat teams that will be sagging off of Amen Thompson on the perimeter. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes in the NBA, and I'll talk about it in a future video. If Amen Thompson has the ball and his guy is not guarding him on the perimeter, get Reed Sheppard on the floor next to him and trigger into a dribble handoff. Have Amen Thompson hand the ball to Reed Sheppard and screen Reed Sheppard's guy. If Amen Thompson is sagging, if Amen Thompson's guy is sagging off of him, Reed Sheppard will be wide open. And Reed Sheppard's the best shooter on the team. Reed Sheppard's going to make a lot of shots this year. If you put him next to Amen Thompson, if you spread the floor around Amen Thompson, driving kicks are going to be there. There's a lot of different options and possibilities because of Thompson's unique length, freakish athleticism. I want to see Ime Udoka not only just let Amen Thompson play and have him have the ball, I want to see him weaponize him. Put certain matchups out there, put certain lineups out there that make Amen Thompson a physical cheat code for other teams to try and deal with, and I promise you, results will follow. Moving on to Indiana, the Pacers, a team that made a nice deep run in the playoffs last year to the Eastern Conference Finals. I want to know, when does the trade happen for Indiana? And this one has less to do with this overall team as a roster, as a context going onto the floor this year. I really trust what the Pacers have on their team. They have an elite floor general point guard, one of the smartest young players in all of basketball, in Tyrese Haliburton. They have a really talented front court with Miles Turner and Pascal Siakam. And you might be saying, well, wasn't the Siakam trade the trade for the Pacers? I really don't think so. Looking at their contracts on their roster, Obi Toppin making a little bit over $13.5 million on his new deal. Aaron Nesmith making exactly $11 million. TJ McConnell, his new deal, making a little bit over $9 million. Benedict Mathurin, I think one of the more polarizing young players in the league, someone who definitely has scoring potential, scoring capabilities. I'm sure a lot of teams would have interest in him, a little bit over $7 million. I know teams have a ton of interest in Jarris Walker. The Pacers have reportedly been shutting down all of those trade talks for a year plus now at this point in time. The Raptors, who traded Siakam to Indiana, I know wanted Jarris Walker, could not get him in that deal. And Isaiah Jackson, a little bit over $4 million. If you look at those contracts there, you've got $45+ million of tradable money. Now, do the Pacers give up all of those guys, only some of them? I'm not exactly sure what the deal would look like yet, but I know Indiana has the assets. They have the young players. They have Andrew Nembhard, who just recently signed an extension as well. He's not tradable presently, but at some point will be. The Pacers have guys who are going to hold value around the league, and they're going to be ready to make a big trade. Now, is it going to be this year? Maybe not. A player who cannot be traded this year is Utah Jazz forward Lauri Markkanen. He would be the perfect player for Indiana. Now, is he available right now? No, he cannot be traded again this season. So, as a result of that, maybe Indiana waits. Maybe they're patient until next offseason. But that's my big question. I trust the Pacers are going to be good again this year. Maybe not Eastern Conference Finals good, but they're going to be a good playoff team for sure in the East. They're going to be a dangerous matchup for anyone who draws them because of their ability to score the basketball and the ability to run efficient offense consistently through their best player. I think Indiana is going to be dangerous again, but at some point they're going to make the move that turns them from dangerous to really, really terrifying in the Eastern Conference. The Los Angeles Clippers. This is a fun one. And my question is James Harden still talented enough to clinch a playoff berth? And I have a little bit of a bone to pick here with people. For years and years and years, on Twitter, all over the internet, we have been slamming Paul George, saying, playoff P, he's a playoff dropper, this, that, and the other thing. Just hating on Paul George relentlessly. And yet, in that same breath, the moment the Los Angeles Clippers lose Paul George, everyone's saying, oh, well, the Clippers are done for now. They don't have Paul George. You guys have been making fun of Paul George for the last half decade, and now the moment the Clippers don't have Paul George, they're all of a sudden done for? Something ain't mathing here, okay? First of all, I think James Harden still is good enough to lead a team to a playoff berth, even in the Western Conference. And I think the Clippers are a dark horse team this year. Not to win an NBA title, but to really surprise some people. I think most people are projecting them currently to be like the 11th seed in the Western Conference. Watch out. I think we're going to get one more final marquee James Harden season where he's averaging 24, 25 points, averaging 9 to 10 assists a night. We're going to get the final hurrah for James Harden this upcoming season. And I think the Clippers, who we'll see what happens with Kawhi Leonard. I think even with Kawhi Leonard, let's say he misses 30, 40 games this year, this Clippers team is built around James Harden in a way to maximize him. They have a tremendous screen setter in Ivica Zubac. They've got a lob threat in Derrick Jones Jr. They've got really connective defensive pieces with Chris Dunn and Nick Batum. They've got pieces around James Harden. They got a shooter in Norm Powell. This Clippers team, I think, is a little sneaky, a little underrated right now, and it's all stemming from them losing Paul George in free agency. Listen here, trust me, with James Harden on the roster, with Kawhi Leonard on the roster, and the surrounding role players that the Clippers have, and a very good head coach in Ty Lue, I think the Clippers can make one more playoff run this year, and I think James Harden is going to be the primary reason they make the postseason once again this upcoming season. Let's stay in Los Angeles with the Lakers, and my question here is, how perfect of a coach is JJ Redick for this Lakers team? And really the answer to that is very, very perfect. That's how I feel going into the season. Now, could I be wrong? Very possibly so, but I think JJ Redick, with everything that I know about him as a person, obviously from his time in media as well, has given us a better insight to his mind as a basketball person in general. He's got a brilliant mind. I love basketball X's and O's. For those of you who've watched for a while, you know that that's what I really care about. I don't care about narratives. I don't care about this, that, or the other thing. I really care about what's happening on a basketball court. And that's exactly how JJ Redick is wired. And that's why I think he's going to be a perfect coach for the Lakers. Because last year, the Lakers did not shoot very many threes as a team. And I think the real easy way for them to improve is shooting more threes. Their offense just needs to be better around LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and the more threes the team takes as a whole will provide more spacing for those two, specifically in the pick and roll. I know people are going to point to, well, in the bubble, they won with a center next to Anthony Davis. And while that was valuable for them, especially when it came to beating Denver, for example, I think one thing that's often overlooked from that championship run is how good the Lakers were shooting from three with no travel, playing in the same gym every single day at the bubble. They were all posting like career numbers in the playoffs from three. KCP was shooting elite. Kyle Kuzma was shooting the ball really well. Anthony Davis had the best shooting postseason of his career. LeBron was shooting incredibly from three. And now you get a head coach who's wired that way. With his role as an NBA player to shoot a lot of threes, he's going to exactly know how to utilize a guy like Dalton Knecht, how to put three-point shooters in positions to succeed, thrive, and shoot a lot of open three-pointers. And he has one of the best to ever do it, if not the best to ever do it, in LeBron James, to create those kinds of opportunities for his teammate. I think D'Angelo Russell is going to shoot a ton of threes. I think we'll see Rui Hachimura shoot a healthy number of threes this year as well. I think JJ Redick's a really good head coach already, and he hasn't even coached a real NBA game yet. So I'm very optimistic on JJ Redick as a coach. Is he Dan Hurley? No. I don't think he's going to be as good of a coach as Dan Hurley would have been for the Lakers, but I think he's a really, really good option still, and I think the Lakers are in good hands with JJ Redick manning the ship for them as their head coach. The Memphis Grizzlies, and this one is going to come across a little bit more pessimistic. Can a Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey front court really survive in the playoffs? And you notice my question for them this upcoming season is playoff related. The Grizzlies are going to be a playoff team. Assuming health, this team is going to be really good. Ja Morant is one of the 15-ish best players in the world for sure. He's just extremely talented. They have an elite screen setter with him now in Zach Edey. And this is part of the issue with pre-draft analysis. Had I known Zach Edey was going to land in Memphis, I'd probably be a little bit more optimistic or a little bit more bullish on his game and how it was going to translate to the NBA, knowing he'd have such a dynamic downhill guard. Another big man who can protect the rim, block shots for him. If Edey's a little bit late on rotations or involved in ball screens a little bit more frequently, I think the Triple J Edey combination works really, really well for the regular season. I think it's going to build a really good team defense construct, and Edey's ability to dominate the glass offensively also function as a really good roll man. He has fantastic hands. Those things are all going to work really, really well for Memphis in the regular season. So why am I pessimistic about the playoffs for this Grizzlies team? One, I think Jaren Jackson Jr. as a power forward is just a little bit of a natural struggle point come playoff time, especially in the West when there's a lot of other big bodies that he's going to have to deal with who are maybe a little bit quicker, maybe even a little bit more skilled than him in certain ways, I think that's going to be a challenge. Very similar to how it was for Kristaps Porzingis when he was playing the power forward for the Dallas Mavericks. It's just a little bit of a different spot, and I think the fact that his floor spacing maybe becomes a little bit less valuable when defended by 4s compared to 5s. The streakiness of his shot, the streakiness of him as a decision maker downhill with the live dribble. There's just things in Jaren Jackson Jr.'s game that I think are a little problematic for Memphis. And then also on the defensive end of the floor, while Triple J can bring elite help around Zach Edey, it's very clear come playoff time as a rookie in the NBA, even though Edey I think is more experienced than most typical rookies are, we're still going to see Edey attacked in the pick and roll quite a bit. And I think in the national championship game, Purdue versus Gonzaga, versus UConn, we saw exactly how an NBA caliber center like Donovan Clingan can make Zach Edey a little bit less efficient, a little bit less optimal as an offensive player, and also still how a team can attack him. And really, even though he's better laterally than he's given credit for, I still think there's flaws with him in drop coverage, and I think teams will look to attack that. How would he go against a team like, say, Minnesota with Anthony Edwards? How would he deal with Jamal Murray in the pick and roll? Those are going to be challenges that Memphis has to, at some point, answer. And I don't know if they're going to be able to with this 4-5 pairing in the Western Conference. Now moving on to the Miami Heat. And I think the Heat are an interesting team going into this year, given their team context. My question is, how often do we see Bam Adebayo and Khalil Ware on the court together? There's been a lot of speculation, a lot of noise, a lot of rumors about Bam Adebayo playing more of the power forward spot and playing a little bit of a bigger team lineup. And that's been something where Miami has struggled over the last few years. Just being a relatively smaller team, playing smaller power forwards, playing Bam Adebayo full-time as a center. He's a little bit smaller in stature compared to someone like Kristaps Porzingis, obviously, or some of the other bigs in the Eastern Conference like Joel Embiid and Brook Lopez as examples. So I think with Adebayo maybe playing a little bit more 4, Khalil Ware playing a little bit more 5, this gives a little bit more lineup versatility to Eric Spoelstra. And again, this is different than the Western Conference, where I just talked about Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey maybe not being the cleanest fit together. Adebayo, I think his handling, the ability to handle the basketball, make reads off on the perimeter as a decision maker, as a passer, is a little bit cleaner and smoother than it is with Jaren Jackson Jr. as well. So in the East, with the context of the teams, obviously Adebayo at the 4 and Ware at the 5 would put a little bit different pressure on teams, where more of a downhill lob threat, can play above the rim a little bit more frequently than Bam Adebayo can, just a naturally bigger body. And Adebayo's got more skill. So, you got the floater you can work to, the ability to attack off of the dribble, rise up into his mid-range game. Now, those are some of the things that have made Bam Adebayo a sub-efficient offensive player at times, because he's not getting the rim volume. But maybe that's where Khalil Ware can really save him in some ways as a combination together. The rim protection here would be elite. Adebayo is very switchy on the perimeter, so I'm not as scared about their defensive context in that regard either. So it's going to be a fascinating situation to watch. I'm not sure how much of it we're going to see this upcoming year, but I think that's going to be one of my biggest questions across the entire NBA, and definitely my biggest one for the Miami Heat this year. The Milwaukee Bucks, and this is one that has been really under the radar. Not a lot of people talk about it, but I think it's the biggest issue with the Milwaukee Bucks. How does Doc Rivers hide Brook Lopez in the Eastern Conference? And this is why the Adrian Griffin firing made very little sense to me. Last year, when Adrian Griffin got fired, the Milwaukee Bucks were one of the best offenses in the league and a little bit sub-mediocre defense. They were, I think, ranked like 20th in the NBA when Adrian Griffin was fired. And that's not good enough. It just isn't. But what Adrian Griffin wanted to do, and part of why he got the head coaching job to begin with in Milwaukee, was he talked in his interview, in his interview to get the position, he talked about playing a little bit more of an aggressive style, very similar to what Toronto had been doing when Adrian Griffin was on the assistant staff underneath Nick Nurse. Toronto, and what Adrian Griffin wanted to bring to Milwaukee, was a little bit more of a blitzing style, where in pick and roll, they'd bring their big up to the level of the screen and force teams to beat you by passing and making timely reads and decisions. And it wasn't working great in Milwaukee, and a lot of the Bucks players wanted to revert back to what they were doing under Mike Budenholzer, which is letting Brook Lopez sit in his deep drop coverage where he's comfortable. But the issue with that, and this is what Doc Rivers reverted back to when he got the head coaching job, he allowed Brook Lopez to sit in deep drop coverage, and guess what? Milwaukee couldn't beat Indiana the entire year. I wonder why that is. Oh, because Miles Turner would pick and pop with Tyrese Halliburton. And it allows Indiana's best player to get downhill. It allows Indiana's best player to engage the big man because he's getting a lot of open space. And it allows Miles Turner to read where the defense is at. Hey, if they're playing up, I can roll. If they're playing low, which is oftentimes what Brook Lopez does, I can stick and pop at the top of the key. I'm going to be wide open. And Indiana feasted on Milwaukee. And if you think about Milwaukee's options this year, who they're going to face in the playoffs potentially, Joel Embiid, that's not an easy matchup, and he's definitely someone who can pick and pop or pick and short roll, get to about 16, 17 feet, and he's pretty much automatic. Or you can think about Kristaps Porzingis. The Boston Celtics shoot more threes than anybody. How does that work with Brook Lopez? It's not going to. Oh, the Knicks just got Karl Anthony Towns. Good luck, Brook Lopez. There's not an easy matchup here for the Milwaukee Bucks if they want to go deep in the Eastern Conference. Everyone's going to talk about Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Damian Lillard pairing. Everyone's going to point to Damian Lillard being a defensive problem. The Bucks' best defensive player for the last half decade has arguably been Brook Lopez. He's also right now their biggest defensive problem. So if they want to figure that out, if they want a solution, they need to move their team defense around a lot. And I just don't know if they have a way to feasibly make Brook Lopez work in the Eastern Conference anymore. The Minnesota Timberwolves, why are they not a favorite in the Western Conference? This is my question right now because even though I was a little skeptical when they first traded Karl Anthony Towns, as I've given myself time to wrap my mind around the deal and to think about it some more, I actually love this Timberwolves team context a lot. I really like what they have. And even though I wouldn't pick them presently to come out of the Western Conference, I think that they should be right there in the conversation for sure. Anthony Edwards is going to take another step forward. He's continued to grow every single year as a playmaker, a decision maker, specifically in the pick and roll. And I think the team spacing just got a lot better trading Karl Anthony Towns. I know people are going to say, wait, what? Trading the 7-foot big man who can shoot, their spacing got better? I think it did for sure, because one thing about Karl Anthony Towns, he was rarely ever catch ready. He very, very rarely flowed right into his catch and shoot opportunities. Very rarely was in a spot where he was just going to be a very quick decision maker. Karl Anthony Towns likes to play slow. He likes to play his style of game, and that is okay. That's nothing wrong with that. But around Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert, at times it got a little clunky and the spacing was a little weird. And that's why, for the season, the Timberwolves had the exact same offensive rating last year with or without Karl Anthony Towns. In the 20 games he missed, they had the exact same offensive rating as they did in the 62 games he played. I think the Wolves' offense, with Dante DiVincenzo now, another elite catch-and-shoot guy, someone who is a little bit more decisive, a little bit more catch-ready as a perimeter player, I think he's going to fit tremendously with Anthony Edwards. I think their team defense actually got stronger without Karl Anthony Towns. And I think this allows Naz Reid to play more minutes. I think, Julius Randle is going to be an interesting situation, but one thing that he definitely helps them do compared to Cat is get out and transition more, run the break a little bit more off of defensive rebounds. I think the Wolves team will play a little bit faster. I think they'll be a little bit more decisive. And I also think it's very, very clear now whose team this is. Even though Karl Anthony Towns last year wouldn't really voice that it was his team, I think at times you could feel a little bit of a disconnect on who's the guy, who should have the ball, and sometimes I just played on the court a little bit. Anthony Edwards is the guy. The whole team knows it now. Everyone's going to play in line off of that. The roles are really well built out. This Timberwolves team is deep. They're fast. They're athletic. They can really defend. This team is going to be really, really good this upcoming season. The New Orleans Pelicans, talking about fast and fun and different. The Pelicans are different. And my big question is, how fast can the New Orleans Pelicans play? Because with the recent news that they're not going to be starting a center like I had predicted this offseason, with Herb Jones playing their small ball five, Zion Williamson in some facets maybe playing the five for them at times, this Pelicans team has to play fast. And I don't just mean transition. Obviously, that's what most people will immediately think about when you hear playing fast or playing quick. That's not the only thing that New Orleans has to do fast offensively. They have to play fast in the half court, especially with the spacing that they have. You think about how they're going to be able to stretch teams out with Herb Jones standing on the three-point line and being a very good catch-and-shoot three-point option. the quicker that they can play in the half court, the more decisive they can be, the quicker they can flow into ball screen actions, off ball actions, the quicker that they can get to spots and score, get to the rim and score, the better. Now, that puts a real emphasis here on a few different players. DeJounte Murray, not always one of the fastest players. He likes to take his time, set things up, get to certain spots in the court. Brandon Ingram, very much like that as well. Brandon Ingram does a good job finding his spots. Again, he's a spot scorer. When he gets to certain points on the floor where he's comfortable, that's where he's really lethal. But at times, that means you're going to play a little bit of a slower style of game. CJ McCollum, he does a good job of playing quick, but at times plays his own pace of game as well. I think DeJounte Murray, Brandon Ingram, especially those two guys, need to very, very quickly flow into actions, flow into their shots, and get to spots on the floor a little bit quicker. And with Zion Williamson, his raw athleticism, dynamism, I think that's still going to be a real problem for teams to deal with. I think he's going to be able to get opposing centers into foul trouble because that's most likely who will be guarding Zion Williamson night in, night out. And I also think it allows Zion the opportunity to grow as a playmaker, triggering into more dribble handoffs. That's been a key essential piece of New Orleans' offensive identity over the last year or so, with Borrego serving as an assistant coach for them. Zion Williamson running DHOs is going to be really, really good, and I think players like DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram can really thrive off of that as well, assuming that Zion's going to be defended mostly by centers this upcoming year. The New York Knicks, well, I maybe spoiled it a little bit, talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves, but can Tom Thibodeau build an effective defense around Karl-Anthony Towns this time? Remember, in Minnesota, he failed to do that before ultimately getting fired with a losing record. In Minnesota, Karl-Anthony Towns and Tom Thibodeau just did not mesh. So it's interesting that the Knicks made such a big move to get Karl-Anthony Towns with Tom Thibodeau as the head coach still. Now, the Knicks do have a little bit of a different team context than what those old Timberwolves teams had. This team has Mikal Bridges, it has OG Anunoby, it has Miles McBride, it has Josh Hart. There's a good defensive infrastructure in place here to help Karl-Anthony Towns around this time in New York. However, I still am very, very skeptical. If you want to see more on if I think Karl-Anthony Towns can be an effective player for New York, I have a video out very recently on the channel called "The Knicks Already Have a Karl-Anthony Towns Problem." That might give you a little bit of insight on how I feel about this Tom Thibodeau pairing there in New York. Let's get on to the Oklahoma City Thunder here now. How many threes are the Thunder willing to take this year as a collective unit? And that's my big question, because last year they just did not shoot very many of them again. They have a lot of spacing, and a lot of people point to their 5-out style and their ability to spread the floor. It just doesn't really breed a lot of three-point shots because their best players specifically didn't take a ton of three-point shots. Chet Holmgren this offseason has emphasized the importance of shooting more threes for himself and making more threes. That's partially why he's worked on different fundamentals and mechanics of his jump shot. Jalen Williams, in preseason play, we've seen him really elevate the number of three-point shots he's taken and making at a very high rate. He's going to be a good shooter regardless of how many he takes. I think he's just an efficient scorer. But I think trading some of that efficiency for more volume is going to be very beneficial for OKC. And I think at the head of the snake, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander already this preseason has shown the willingness to shoot more threes, especially pull-up threes. That's what we need to see more from this OKC team as a whole, especially to fit in someone like Isaiah Hartenstein, who may or may not shoot a couple of them this year. We'll see how that exactly plays out. There's some rumors and speculation that Hartenstein will shoot quite a few of them. I'm not exactly certain. I don't want to completely bet on that. But I do think this trio here for OKC of Holmgren, J-Dub, and Shai have really put in the emphasis and work to up their own three-point volume in order to make their team as a whole shoot more threes collectively. And I think guys like Isaiah Joe will still really thrive in their kind of spot-up three-point shooting roles. Alex Caruso is definitely going to add in a decent volume of threes too. I think one of the few things that could really limit the Thunder from being the Western Conference team to make the NBA Finals is if they just don't shoot and make enough threes. Think about some of their shortcomings last year, especially against Dallas, where Dallas just made more threes than them. Pretty point blank, right? It's not great analysis, but it's just the reality. PJ Washington got hot. The Thunder, just with Josh Giddey on the floor and their current context, what they had last year, they just didn't shoot and make enough threes. And I think this year that's going to be a big barometer for them is how well are they playing is if they're shooting a lot of threes and if they're making a lot of threes. And it's honestly maybe not the most fun, most attractive style of play, but with their drive and kick oriented style, they should be shooting more of them. And I think this year they will. The Orlando Magic, another team where it was kind of hard to come up with a real question. My biggest one really centers around their best player. Can Paolo Banchero become a premier rim finishing threat? And if you look at his drive stats from this last postseason, his first playoff run, so don't be too hard on him for that, but also this past regular season, it's very clear that Paolo Banchero still has a lot of room to grow as a scorer, specifically for someone who is 6'10", 230 pounds. He's a big, strong body. He's physical. You would think these numbers would be better. If you look at his drive stats, in the playoffs, he shot under 40% on drives. In the regular season, he shot just a little bit over 40% on drives. Now, there's a lot of things in play here. Okay, first of all, he's driving the ball a lot, so that's a very, very good sign. Had 12.3 drives in the playoffs, 12.7 drives in the regular season. So you love his aggressiveness there. Part of the context here for Orlando, adding KCP is going to help this. It's just one better shooter on the floor that's going to stretch team defenses out just a little bit more, give Banchero a reliable catch and shoot target to pass the ball to as well. I think that's going to be, first of all, very, very beneficial. The other question is, can Paolo Banchero actually improve his handle? Right now, I think that's the biggest concern I have for Paolo Banchero. In tight spaces, he just doesn't trust his handle. He's not able to play faced up to the hoop a ton. He oftentimes reverts to playing with his back to the basket and kind of using his body as a frame to protect the ball. And at times that can be very beneficial, especially against smaller defenders, using your muscle and strength to back them down. But I think he's a little over-reliant on that. So if Paolo Banchero is going to take the next step forward as an overall star, as a true three-level scorer, he has to be better as a finisher at the rim on drives, most specifically. I think that's the big question here for Orlando. I'm really hopeful he does take that step this year or at worst next year. But that'll be the one thing that if he never takes that step, it's what stops him from being an elite offensive player in the NBA with all of his athletic gifts and size and strength and just the overall game we've seen him play with so far. The Philadelphia 76ers, and you would think with playoff P I might be asking about that, but really my big question is Joel Embiid actually healthy in the playoffs? And this one's super simple. Okay, I'm tired of the, oh well, does he have the surrounding talent? Does he have this? Does he have that? At the end of the day, one of these years we just need to see Joel Embiid healthy and play amazing in the playoffs. We just need to see it. He's had Ben Simmons who's gotten scapegoated. He had James Harden who got scapegoated, even though James Harden was actually pretty good in his Philadelphia playoff runs, I would say. Joel Embiid just needs to show up and be the guy and win them playoff series, multiple of them in 1 year. We need to see him make an Eastern Conference Finals. We need to see him make a Finals at some point in time. And I'm done putting the emphasis on if their third best player is good or not. I'm tired of saying, oh, it's Tobias Harris's fault. Okay, it's not. At some point, Joel Embiid has to be healthy, and he has to win them playoff series. And I think this might be the year to do it. So, again, I'm not discounting him. I'm not counting him out. But at some point, it can't be an if thing anymore. We just need to see it. And for Joel Embiid, I think this could be the year. And if he's healthy in the playoffs, he's going to dominate. I think he's very well capable of that. He's such a talented player. He's such a good player. I know people think he's a foul grifter, this, that, and the other thing. He's really, really good at basketball. So when he's on the court and healthy, he's really, really dominant. We just actually need to see it. And if he is, there can't be any more excuses. Now on to the Phoenix Suns. Talking about excuses. Frank Vogel got fired, this, that, and the other thing. Well, Mike Budenholzer's a really good head coach. Okay, let me get that straight. And the question here I'm seeing in the preseason, we've seen a lot of really good ball movement, a lot of great offense created through passing. And I want to know if the fun ball movement that we've seen so far in the preseason, does that actually stick when it comes to the regular season and playoffs if the Suns do make the postseason this upcoming year? While Mike Budenholzer has been a regular season wins machine for years and years and years, I am semi-pessimistic here about the Phoenix Suns. I think their team is relatively small. Yusuf Nurkic doesn't bring a lot of rim protection. I just have questions about them holistically, if the ball movement's going to be there, if the scoring's there, and if their stars miss 20, 30 games again, like they've typically done over the last couple of years. Beal's not been very healthy. Durant's had his fair share of injury history. Even Booker over the last few years has had his collection of injuries tally up on the injury report. The ball movement needs to be there because it's the Suns' real best chance at being anything. If the ball movement's not there, they're not going to be a very good team. Honestly, their roster is not that great. I know people are going to say, well, they got Tyus Jones, they got this, they got Monte Morris. Okay, listen. Tyus Jones was the starting point guard for a team that won 15 games. Okay. Tyus Jones, at the end, again, this kind of goes back to what I was just talking about with Philadelphia. There can't be all these excuses for Kevin Durant. 2 of his last 3 playoff runs, he was swept in the first round twice. Okay? So he's not been someone who's been making deep playoff runs. You can't give him the benefit of the doubt anymore. Okay? He's into his mid to late 30s. And that's okay. It doesn't diminish his career at all. But you just have to look at it realistically and say, wow, Kevin Durant, 2 of his last 3 playoff runs didn't even win a playoff game. Can we really bet on Kevin Durant to be this elite offensive option for them night in, night out, in isolation all the time, winning like he did in OKC the way that he did? No. So the ball movement has to be there, and the entire team for Phoenix has to play really, really well offensively for them to have a chance, because I don't trust their team defense still, and I have a lot of concerns about their rim protection. I have a lot of concerns about their ball movement when it comes to playoff time. If you go rewatch the Suns versus Timberwolves series from the first round this year, the Suns' ball movement was horrendous. Tyus Jones definitely helps that. They have gotten better in that area, but it needs to stick, and it comes down to their stars. Like, at the end of the day, point guard wasn't the problem as much for the Suns as it was, hey, their star players wanted to isolate and try and score themselves. And yes, while it was Frank Vogel's fault for allowing that to happen, I mean, the owner was also saying, I want the ball in the hands of Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, which in theory makes sense, but in practice didn't. So we'll see if the Suns actually stick to this, or if this is something that throughout the course of an 82-game season fades away and becomes a thing of the past for the Suns, and they need it presently every single game that they play, in my opinion. The Portland Trailblazers, again, coming from a little bit of a place of pessimism. Does Chauncey Billups finish the season as the Trailblazers head coach is my big question. The Blazers are not going to be contending for a playoff spot. They will not be contending for a play-in spot. They are not good. Denny Avdia is probably their best player. I do agree with Chauncey Billups in that regard. But I just want to point out, when Chauncey Billups took over for Terry Stotts in Portland, he took over, and at the time, it was Dame time. And what Dame time meant was, hey, I just hit a game-winning shot in the fourth quarter on a playoff team that's hopeful for the playoffs, that we're going to make some deep run in the postseason. And under Chauncey Billups' vision, under Chauncey Billups' watch, it went from Dame time to Dame's time to leave. And let's be real, Chauncey Billups was supposed to be this defense-first head-minded coach. Listen, he hasn't had the personnel. I completely understand that. There hasn't been any form of good defense being played in Portland at all, to be completely honest with you. It's been horrendous. So the question Portland has to ask themselves is, Chauncey Billups the guy we want overseeing Scoot Henderson's development, overseeing Donovan Clingan's development? And I can't tell you the answer to that question is yes. I just can't say that. So will Chauncey Billups finish the season as the Trailblazers head coach? Maybe. Does he start next year as the Blazers head coach? I'm not sure. We'll see. I think that's going to be the most important thing to monitor here for Portland over the next 12 months. The Sacramento Kings, they made a big-time acquisition this offseason of DeMar DeRozan. And my question is, how does DeMar DeRozan impact the Kings' half-court spacing? I think DeMar DeRozan, first of all, I have to get this out of the way, I think he's going to be tremendous with Domantas Sabonis. I think when Sabonis is triggering into zoom and dribble handoffs with DeRozan being the recipient, that's going to be money for Sacramento. I think it's going to be so good. DeRozan, first of all, is such an underrated playmaker. I think one of the most overlooked aspects of his game is his ability to make reads off of a live dribble and just consistently make the right pass without being super flashy. And it's not like the most evident thing when you're watching him. It's not like, wow, that was such a great pass. It's just consistently the right pass. So first of all, that's something that's very underlooked in DeMar DeRozan's game. Secondly, his ability to score the ball is just going to be really good. With DeRozan, with Sabonis setting screens for DeRozan, he's going to get to spots and score pretty easily, and it's going to feel a lot better than it did in Chicago for him. I guarantee that. The question for me, though, is how does DeRozan on the court affect their spacing? You know, in past years, the Kings have had guys like Keegan Murray, Obviously, Harrison Barnes didn't get guarded by anybody, so it's still a little bit of a toss-up. But for the Kings, that's kind of what my concern here is, though, is like, teams didn't guard Harrison Barnes when he didn't have the ball. Are they going to be super scared of DeMar DeRozan when he doesn't have the ball, specifically standing on the three-point line? Let's say if you're running something with Fox or Malik Monk having the ball at the top of the key, or maybe Sabonis is triggering into a dribble handoff with one of those two. What is DeMar DeRozan's matchup doing? Is he defending him on the three-point line? Is he sagging off of him pretty aggressively? Is he like semi-sagging off of him? That'll be the most important question for me. We just don't have the answer to that right now, to be honest. I can't even speculate because teams might be scared of giving DeRozan a bunch of space, because then if he does work up to a ball screen or go and get the basketball and you're out of position early, it's going to lead your team defense probably down a bad rabbit hole. But at the same time, you just flat out don't have to guard DeMar DeRozan that tightly on the three-point line. So it's going to be a big question for me, and one that I'm just not sure we're going to have the answer for until 10, 15, 20 games into the season. The San Antonio Spurs, while I'm very optimistic on this team's future, their present is a little bit more cloudy, and my biggest question is, do the Spurs know that Victor Wembanyama is 7'4"? And I think the answer to that is yes, they know it, but they don't want to acknowledge it, for a couple of different reasons, okay? The Spurs, obviously they know he's tall, right? Like, they drafted him because he's this big. Partially first overall, and because the potential is enormous. You guys know how optimistic I am on Victor Wembanyama. But if you go back to my pre-draft analysis on him, what I said continuously was that Victor Wembanyama is a center, and he needs to play offensively like a center. For him to be the best version of himself, he will be utilizing his touch, his ability to catch the basketball in tight windows, and his sheer size over everybody to finish at the rim at an extraordinary rate. That is what he will be better than anyone in the league right now at. Even someone like Giannis, who's a complete freak, an athletic monster, can get downhill whenever he wants, scores whenever he wants. Victor Wembanyama is enormous. He is huge. He can catch the ball in any radius within his body. Like, he's unbelievable. And he can finish at the rim. If he continues to shoot only step-back threes and try and dribble the ball from the perimeter all game long, every single season for the rest of his career, you're going to get underwhelming results compared to what he can be. While, listen, I know the Spurs want him to grow in those areas. They want to give him developmental pathways to do that, and that's what's going to happen this year again. I think Chris Paul is going to be a really useful mentor here, understanding, Victor, you're bigger than everybody. I'm going to throw you a lob because you're bigger than everybody. And I think just like being grounded in that reality a little bit, I think is going to help not only the Spurs, but I really think it's going to help Victor Wembanyama's development. I think the easiest thing for Victor Wembanyama right now is to do whatever he wants. Like, it's really easy and it's mentally free to get on the basketball court and just do what you want to do. But I think when it comes to actual execution and game plan management and just playing within an NBA offense a little bit, I mean, what's the answer for guarding Wembanyama as a roll man? Is there really an answer for it? Because he can short roll, he can play make out of the middle of the floor, he's got touch, he's got floaters, he can catch basically any lob. He's 7'4". I mean, like, I don't have to explain. He's got an 8-foot wingspan. He can catch any ball. The ball's up in the air, he's going to get it. Like, that's what San Antonio needs to do more of. And again, it's not about winning this year, but at some point in time, the Spurs need to realize, like, that's our easy offense. That's the Nuggets have the Jamal Murray Jokic pick and roll. The Mavericks have the Luka Doncic isolation. The Celtics have the drive and kick game. The Thunder have the drive and kick game, right? Every single team, the Kings have their dribble handoffs. Every single team has something that is their go-to thing. The Spurs' go-to thing needs to be, Victor, get close to the hoop and we'll find a way to get you the ball and you're going to score. Like, I love everything about his perimeter game. I love all the upside. I acknowledge all the upside. That's part of why I think he can be the greatest player we ever see. Get to the rim more, play at the rim more, play as a big man more, roll to the rim more. More rim, the better. And if the Spurs acknowledge that, it will be good for Victor Wembanyama's career. It will be good for his development. And it will be really, really, really good for his production and for San Antonio eventually winning a lot of games at some point in time. It won't be this year. The roster's not ready for it. But Victor Wembanyama, the more the rim, the better. Toronto. This team is interesting, and I've talked about it a lot with Masai Ujiri and the Raptors since their trades this past year of OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam. They have talent. They don't have a lot of players who fit right now. So for me, the question is, what are the Bruce Brown and Jakob Poeltl trades? Where do they get traded? What do they get back for them? And how does it really reconfigure this roster to making some more sense? I think they need more spacing. They need more shooting. I think Grady Dick will be an instrumental part of this team around Scotty Barnes, around RJ Barrett. We'll see how those two guys play together this year. Obviously, Emmanuel Quickley is one of the big wild cards for them. If they get the best version of Emmanuel Quickley, which I think is possible, they could have a really formidable perimeter trio of Barnes, Quickley, and Barrett, with Barrett being the third guy of that trio. And again, that doesn't mean that the Raptors are going to win 40, 50 games that way yet either. But I just think this team context doesn't fit yet. I think Bruce Brown's a little bit of a weird fit here still. And Jakob Poeltl, I think, is just not a fit at all. I just didn't understand why they traded for him in the first place to get him back from San Antonio, especially at the price that they paid. I would just love if this team had Rob Dillingham right now, to be completely honest with you. But I think, whatever they are able to get for Bruce Brown and Jakob Poeltl, good. If they're able to get picks, good. If they're able to get a young player, maybe, that would be good. If they're able to just get off the salaries and get something of value, I think that would be good. Toronto, they're still in rebuild mode right now. Scotty Barnes is really legit. He's the franchise player. There's no doubt about that. They just need to figure out some of the pieces that go around that, and they need to do a lot of roster reconfiguration right now because the overall conglomeration of pieces just don't fit perfectly together. I think, again, just more spacing, context, more players that fit around Scotty Barnes specifically. I think if you copy some of what Milwaukee has done with Giannis Antetokounmpo, you're going to find success. Now, that's not easy to do. It's not easy to find a stretch five who can protect the rim. It's not easy to find a bunch of players who fit in that, but I think more Kelly Olynyk, less Jakob Poeltl this year would be good. And I think just playing with a little bit more pace and space would be really, really good for some of the young developing pieces that Toronto has. The Utah Jazz, a team that, again, they're kind of in rebuild mode. My big question is, how does Keontae George look in year two? And is he a true point guard? Kind of evaluated him as a combo guard coming out of college. And I think after year one of seeing him play point guard and some of the interesting lineups that Will Hardy put around him, I'm not completely shut off to him being a point guard. But I still lean toward him being a combo guard. But listen, year two is always way better than year one, especially for guards. They take just such a developmental step forward. And there was a lot of flashes for Keontae George in year one as well. So I'm not completely shut off from him being a point guard. And I think this is especially essential for Utah because of their front court context, right? You have Walker Kessler, John Collins, and Lauri Markkanen right now. Kessler is predominantly going to be a rim finisher after screening. He's going to be someone who just isn't going to be a low post option. He's not the super high skilled big man offensively. We knew that before the draft, right? Lauri Markkanen is a very talented offensive player, but a lot of it comes off the catch. He's not really a give me the ball, get out of my way type of player, and that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. If one of your best players is capable of functioning off of other players and off of actions and thriving in that kind of role, that's really, really good. That's actually really beneficial in a lot of ways. But it means if you don't have great point guard play, you don't have great facilitation around him, maybe you're not getting the most out of him that you could. And I think from where we saw with Mike Conley a couple of years ago to Keontae George last year, the value of a veteran point guard is immense. And the role and power of a real point guard is super useful. Keontae George just isn't quite that yet, but I think year two could be a really big growth year for him. They also have Isaiah Collier. I'm not super optimistic or hopeful there. We'll see. I don't want this to be such a pessimistic video, but I'm hopeful Keontae George can take that step forward maybe in year two. The final team, the Washington Wizards. Really excited about Washington. Again, a team that's not going to be contending this year. My question, though, how many minutes does Alex Sarr get to play at the center spot this season? How many minutes will he play as the 5? After a couple of preseason games, I'm totally done with Jonas Valanciunas. I don't want to see him in a Washington Wizards jersey again. I understand he's big, he boxes out, he rebounds, right? Like, Jonas Valanciunas does have value still in the league. I'm just tired of watching him, and I don't want to watch him play for Washington, okay? I want to see Alex Sarr play at the 5. I want all of the defensive responsibility to be on him. Yes, it's going to lead to a lot of losing. I'm totally okay with that. I think Alex Sarr is such a freakish defensive player. I'm so optimistic about what he's going to be defensively in his career. He's just going to be a really, really good defensive player. I promise. I guarantee it, basically. But I think the more minutes you can give him as a 5 this year, the better. Put the responsibility on him. Make him play in pick and roll, ball screens all the time. Give him the experience early. I think playing him at the 4 a little bit is smart. I do think that's one of the benefits of having Jonas Valanciunas, right? Is you get to let Sarr play as a roamer and let him maybe get a little bit more comfortable in the NBA before you throw all of this responsibility on him. But at the same time, I think as a player, he has the tools and traits to take on that responsibility and find some success with it early. If you have a player who's not ready for that responsibility at all, you don't want to heap it on them. But I think Sarr is ready for some of that responsibility. And while it might be a little overwhelming at first, I think he's someone who can live up to that and grow into that and showcase why he's the number 2 overall pick in the 2024 NBA draft and why I had him number 1 on my big board. He can defend, he can protect the rim, and if you play him at the 5, that's what's going to open up your offense. Jonas Valanciunas is not going to provide a lot of offensive help for Washington. You know, yes, he'll set screens, but he doesn't really roll hard. He's not a pick and pop threat. Like, Alex Sarr is going to be their cheat code at the 5 if they want to improve their offense, if they want to make Jordan Poole look good, if they want to spread the floor and help Bilal Coulibaly as a finisher, if they want to train up Kyle Kuzma's trade value. Playing Alex Sarr at the 5 is probably the cheat code to making all of their other players look a little bit more efficient offensively. That's what I want to see. They probably won't do it very much, but that's my big question. How often do we get to see Alex Sarr playing center for the Washington Wizards in the 2024-2025 season? I really hope you guys did enjoy this video. It was a lot of fun to talk about all 30 teams, my 30 questions for all of them. Let me know down in the comment section below what your questions are for these teams, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.